So the first episode we talked about kind of like the lost rules of graffiti, and that would be definitely an interesting topic to talk to you about it, because Cub and I were talking about that, and you're part of the culture but in a totally different way than we are. So I think like you have a different perspective on things that are happening within the culture than maybe we would. The sort of lost rules and the information not getting passed down from one generation to the next. We kind of take some responsibility for not doing our part in schooling the youngsters, like what was done for us.
Fault.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, to a certain to a certain extent.
People have been talking.
Yeah.
By the way,
things.
By the way, are you going to be introducing me later or earlier before?
So maybe you introduce yourself. Let's try it that way.
I'm Steve Grody. I've been coming up in June. It'll be 30 years steady rolling on documenting the scene in LA nonstop. And it's been really interesting for me to see the evolution and how things just have played out. And things there's always the unexpected developments, and then there's kind of the expected developments. There are people that kind of stay with old school. There are people that want to push in different directions. It's interesting because it's a human activity, and that means it's complex, it's social. There's great things, there's stupid things, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly always, and it continues.
Well, that's exactly why we wanted to talk to you, because of that perspective.
It's been interesting to try and be the just neutral documentarian.
Sure.
And I have opinions, but I'm not going to tell you any of them. I mean, in terms of, people, well, who were your favorite?
Yeah.
Right.
Because you start to say who you thought, blah, 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 and then people get their panties all up in a bunch.
Absolutely.
It's all very sensitive.
Yeah.
And it's that much more sensitive for somebody who is got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I feel very, I feel honored that there's been the people say I'm in the mix or part of the history, or and then but there are always people that will look at me sideways because one guy was saying, well, you've never felt the wind in your hair from running from the police. I'm not, dude. First of all, I don't have much hair, have wind in. Okay. Secondly, so what?
Right.
It's like everybody's got to have your same exact experience, but that's okay. I there's always everybody here knows that you can't do anything without somebody
Sure.
being thinking that you shouldn't do it or you're not doing it right or whatever. But I've tried to be. I've never jocked any one crew. I just tried to go out there and get what there is to get, and it's interesting to see what's developed over 30 years.
I know you don't want to give advice or any of that kind of stuff, but like, what's your take on the stuff that we were talking about? And do you see that? I don't know what the
I would
right
like to
word.
see. I would love to see more response. It was interesting on 50mm.com a few years back. They did a little survey. They said, okay, mural bombing. Okay, bombing on public murals for people that don't understand that word, painting on public murals by graffiti writers. You approve, you disapprove. And 70% of the people that responded said, we're basically 2 thumbs down. And that's, nobody was trying to act good for the public because it's a graffiti website for graffiti writers. And the 30%, that doesn't mean that 30% that disagreed are actively bombing public murals. And I know that there are crews that say, if you're going to be part of this crew, you respect all art.
Right.
I would love to see more schooling in that regard. But this is where anybody that's bombing public murals would say, oh well, that guy, some old guy that's, what does he know? He's not a graffiti writer. He's just some guy taking pictures, so who's he? But there are the majority of veteran graffiti writers that I know think it sucks.
Yeah, I am.
You're one of them.
Yeah,
I feel the same way. I don't. I don't like seeing that. I mean, I really share a lot of the same stuff you're talking about as far as giving advice. I mean, like if somebody asks me for advice, and I feel like I have something I could tell them, I always start with, I don't like giving advice, but here's what I would do, and this is my own personal thing.
Right.
I see the bombing of murals, and it really bothers me. It's just sort of like, I know like part of it is because it's so hard to buff. They're like, they can't just go and paint gray over it. So
yeah, but so what?
What? Yeah. I mean,
I've heard the reasons, and I think they don't hold up.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the things that's interesting that's on the other side of that coin is I do a lot of benching. Sometimes in LA, but a lot of times in Iowa, because I spend a lot of time in Iowa, and it's interesting. I see guys from LA rolling through Iowa all the time, and I love it. But one of the things that's pretty consistent is, by and large, the majority of train bombers stay off the information numbers, go around the information numbers.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you two, how much of that do you think is because they're thinking, well, just because we're doing something illegal doesn't mean we have to be jerks and make the business hard for the train and cover the identification numbers? How much of it's that, and how much of it do you think is that they know they're going to get stamped over big time by the train company to put the information back on there, and it's going to obscure their piece? How much do you think that boils down to?
I would hope that it comes down to them
having ethics.
Ethics, absolutely.
Ethics.
And, yes.
Ethics.
And you know what? Your opinion is very valuable, because the things that you've known and the information you've acquired over all these years is far beyond a lot of writers that are well known, that haven't really schooled themselves on so many things. So what you say here to me is very important.
Well, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. People ran into some veterans the other day, and they were talking about, that I know so much stuff, and I'm thinking, well, if I know a lot, it's still a fraction of what there is to know.
Sure.
Because everybody's got their own personal history, everybody's got their own personal take, their own personal experiences, and so I always feel appropriately humble about what I know, because every time I talk to somebody, there's some new bit of history that they kick down, something new, and so it's interesting. So
yeah,
I never think I have it all dialed in.
Absolutely, and we're always learning and growing. And going back to your question, I believe that there are some writers that look at it as long-term, don't want to be stamped out. Right? But I believe real, true long-term is, we don't want to burn this yard. You don't leave your cans, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't paint over the numbers. That's another way they identify where you guys are doing your work and how long this spot's going to last. So for me, if I really want to look at something long-term, it's the preservation of where we do our work first.
Right.
And then, you of course, you hope that it stays running without the stamp.
Not that you personally have ever done train bombing. Let's make that clear.
Me?
I mean, I would also hope that there is the respect thing.
Sure.
The knowledge as it's passed down is you avoid that, so you don't get buffed or stamped or whatever. I mean, I personally, as an older writer, an older person, it definitely comes into my mind that I'm like, some dude doesn't like coming out here and fucking painting these numbers over. So like, I even bring, theoretically, I bring tape, tape the numbers, and then you get this nice, maybe that's toy. I don't know.
I've even seen, it's what you do.
Yeah.
It's not, and I've seen other guys that they felt like they went over the numbers, so they painted the numbers back in.
We used to do that too.
Yeah.
We painted above, and it's like, do you think the train workers are really going to trust some tagger writing the numbers back.
Although a lot of those are left, I have seen those left just as is because they did a good enough job of emulating the stamp itself.
Yeah,
right?
Or they can see enough under the numbers to see that they duplicated the numbers correctly.
Yeah,
I've seen pieces of mine from the '90s that I covered all the numbers, but I wrote it above, and it's just like, you think the train people are really going to be like, oh, well, that's the number of the train. This goods are going to wherever. This guy was
Let
nice
this
enough.
one ride.
This fat cap tag of the numbers above his piece. What a good guy.
Yeah, I don't know. That leads me to wonder. I wanted to ask you what you thought, what your, how do you feel about the way things have been preserved or lost in the sense of communication amongst writers and crews and the ethics and kind of going over those things, or is that something that's almost ridiculous to even consider with the amount of new writers there are out here and flooding the yards and the trains and this and that?
You mean, do you think the standards are being kind of
watered
passed down? Yeah, there's well, let me put it this way. What I hear from veteran writers more often than not is that the rules of the game have not been well passed down.
Sure.
Just the whole thing that if you're going to go over some, the basic, a tag on a blank wall, don't get up all about it if somebody puts a throwaway over your tag. Don't get up about it if somebody puts a piece over your throwaway. If somebody puts a piece over the production over the piece, that's not a problem, but cover it up,
Right.
And that, a lot of that's gotten lost. There's when I've rolled around with some guys, they've talked about one of the problems is not just the loss of some of the standards or rules of behavior, has to do with unfortunate drug stuff.
Yes.
Some guy was pointing out, you see that guy, he's all over everybody, but he's a meth head.
Yes.
And so that's, you're not going to have exactly the best judgment, when you're smoking that crap.
Right. It's hard to avoid bad judgment when you're making those kind of choices.
Yeah. That's one of the main reasons that this means so much to me is because I found my way down that rabbit hole. So I understand exactly how skewed and lost, and you're absolutely right. And that's spreading like wildfire, just that whole lifestyle. I mean, I know there was, issues back in the 70s and 80s, but not like we see today, I'm assuming, and the way how quickly things are catching fire in that sense.
Yeah. So still, most of the time, so in terms of some of the old school, what used to be considered ethics, there's ethics between the public and graffiti culture, and then there's ethics between graffiti writers.
Right.
And so in terms of between graffiti writers and the public, it was don't ever hit a religious institution. That's still mostly good. No graveyards, mostly good. I mean, the only people that hit graveyards are, racist jackasses with, some, anti-Semitic bullshit. Yeah. And then you mostly no private homes. Private homes maybe will get hit by neighborhoods, but not so much graffiti writers. But graffiti writers are not always so good about apartment buildings. Yeah. Still no cars by and large, and that's nice to see. So there's X amount of the standard ethics in terms of between graffiti and the public that are good. There's too much, Old Man Grody says there's too much. You kids, Grandpa Simpson says, back in my day, that the mural bombing, the stuff on the 101 coming through downtown, that, and I see veteran graffiti writers on there. I'm like, really, really, come on, and then the stuff of between the ethics between. Within the graffiti culture, again, there are kids that are not respecting. I mean, just the basic thing: don't go over anything you can't burn. If you can't do better than what's there, just don't. And So the ethics thing, it would be nice if I don't know how that would be done, where the generation coming up is schooled, because there's a natural generational thing to say, well, we're now, you're old enough to be my dad, so why would I listen to you?
Sure.
But on the other hand, there's still a certain amount of authority, there's a certain amount of respect for veteran crews, I think. And so there's a chance that veteran crews could make a statement.
Well, I think it's different. I've had this conversation a few times. Like, as a 46-year-old man, there's a common ground between me and a 17-year-old writer, and there's a mutual respect between each other. If I look at myself as a 16, 15-year-old kid, there wasn't any 45-year-old men or women that I gave a fuck about what they said. So like graffiti and hip hop culture and these different things, there is a common ground, but that what you're saying is still there. I'm still a 46-year-old man with fucking gray hair and my beard, but I feel hopeful because of that mutual thing. Like, I've done what you were doing.
Yeah, you're not saying, why are you doing graffiti? Get a job.
Yeah,
or get a job.
Graffiti, but
you're not saying don't do graffiti. You're just saying do it in a way. It's like, there's bold graffiti and there's sly graffiti. There's like billboard graffiti is obviously bold.
Sure.
You get a lit up billboard, on a major street corner, that's bold. And there are guys that are doing that. And, my props to the guys that are blending in with the billboard. And there's one person that I've got just a few of that's really interesting. I haven't been able to identify him, but everything, all of his stuff is behind all the information on the billboard. And so he's like saying, okay, I'm going to get up here, but I'm not going to get in the way of any of your business. I'm just going to kind of sneak by. And then there's some places near me in Lincoln Heights that on this little wall by the 5 North, it's like 1.5 feet tall, but there's this long, really nice stuff by Crabs and Bouge and some guys that it's going to slide, it's going to stay there because nobody sees it, it doesn't draw attention,
right?
And so I kind of like people that I like it when people do something that is anything that's not messing, that still somehow is respecting too.
I got you.
It's not as disruptive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I learned that lesson, and I told this story in another episode where when I was leaving Motor Yard, I caught a big stupid tag, and Eclipse kind of schooled me, and he was like, hey man, you don't want to do graffiti for the general public. You want to do it for graffiti writers, And I was like, shit, I never thought of that. And it like changed my whole perspective on how to catch tags and where I caught tags. So like I started finding these like a little odd brick somewhere, or like a little pipe or something, somewhere where you can catch a tag that a writer will see because they're looking for it, but like the guy that's buffing stuff won't. So I was always looking for those spots, those little, even with throwies and stuff like that. Like, hey, what if I snuck a throwie on this thing? Graffiti writers are like all over the place.
Yeah.
They're looking, so they'll see it,
Yeah.
but the public won't. Maybe it'll last longer.
Yeah, there's a lot of graffiti for graffiti writers.
Exactly,
It's like, you saw that, you get to see this because you made the effort to come here.
Yeah.
And I like that. How careful do I have to be about talking about stuff here? Is this?
You're good.
I'm
Yeah,
good?
I mean,
Okay.
we can cut
well,
it out.
so
if
talking
it's,
about so talking about Motor Yard. Motor Yard was pretty cool, but then there was that time when I think it was Fever did that. Was it 12 feet high of a devil? Fucking an angel doggy style.
Oh yeah.
All facing the apartment buildings.
Yes.
I'm thinking that's when a lot of heat started to come down, because
Yeah,
I can
it's
see, Grandma Mary opening the curtain in the morning.
Oh yeah. I didn't even think about that. That piece was so dope.
I thought, I got good pictures of that, but I thought, dude, you could have done it on the other wall, so it's just facing nothing.
Yeah, sure.
But it's facing the bank of apartment buildings, and don't be surprised if heat comes down on all of a sudden graffiti writers.
Yes,
that's entirely possible. I mean, it's a good observation. I mean, that kind of stuff. If it's going to rattle,
it did seem to be a period when all of a sudden there was heat coming down.
Yeah, I could see a lot of calls being made over something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could tell you though. I could tell you that in my. I knew early on that if I was going to keep track of stuff, I needed to keep track. I needed to get the information down right away.
Yeah.
So basically what I do is originally I was just, until 2008, I was shooting primarily slide film. And so I would get the slides developed, and then I would put it into a slide page of 20, and then on each slide I would put the number of the slide page. And then when I finally scanned things, and then also on the slide, I would say, okay, what yard? And then when I finally scanned things in and backed it up, I would say what slide page, what it said if it wasn't just the writer's name, who the writer was, if I know who it is, and I got thousands of X's because I don't know who did it. Mm-hmm. And then the month, the year, the yard, the month, the year.
Nice. That's way more organized than with files.
That's the way it should be done.
Yeah. I just because it's interesting historically. Yeah. I wish that I had been, believe it or not, a little bit more obsessive.
Really?
and actually made some notes. Like when the first time that I saw somebody highlight the border, it stood out in my eyes. Like, oh, that's interesting. Somebody's highlighting their border.
Oh, like with the little...
Yeah. Just, or when, what's the first time I saw a drop shadow on the interior of a letter to make it look like the letter dropped in rather than on the edge.
Right.
Little technical developments. What's the first time I saw a big comma accent? That's what I call it because it looks like a big fat comma as a highlight.
Sure.
That was a style. There were these little technical fashions and developments over time. And, if I had thought about it a little bit, thinking more ahead, I would have said, oh, this is when the first time I saw such and such and such.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I didn't even think about.
And it's interesting because at a certain point, then there are actually people. I don't want to clown anybody, but there are times when I thought if I was tempted to make a post and say, okay, look at this piece. Here's somebody trying to bite off more than they can chew.
Oh, yeah.
They're trying to do all this technical stuff, and they don't particularly have can control or any sense of design or anything else, but they're trying to do, cracks and highlights and all this stuff, but it's just falling apart.
Too much, right. And that's something we were just talking about recently. The last session that we had was, because for myself, I would pride myself on not seeing too much. Like even I write music as well, and I don't want to hear a certain amount before I'm doing my thing, because you get these influences which can be very positive, but sometimes too much. So the conversation we were having was like just now when you brought up this guy, which I know is fire. He's got skills. He's doing his thing, but I don't pay too close of attention to really anything. I'm just now getting back into kind of peeping the social media scene, the platforms. Because I didn't like that overabundance of information. Like the discussion we had was this, how pure it was to just have one book and a Sharpie and not have all this extra noise around you or flip, and just be so stuck in the zone, right? So, we were just having that conversation. At one point, I was convinced that those coming up today have the advantage of all this information and all this color and style and all these different things. But now, the more I kind of redirect, even though that's positive influence,
it's a problem too.
It's a problem too. And what have you seen, or what's your perspective on that overabundance of visual, inspiration for these guys?
Well, the first thing that I always kind of go back to what people have told me they see, and what they say is that back in the day, there used to be more regional style, and then there was a little bit more crew style. There's still crews that are more clearly crew style. It's like if I can say something about this, I mean, there are lots of crews that have lots of strong writers.
Yeah.
But in terms of crew style, it's like LTS is very distinctive, K4P is very distinctive, K2S.
I2W definitely is too.
You know, so it's interesting to see people that still have a crew aesthetic, even though there's obviously individuals in between it. The problem with all the available information is that, arguably, that people sometimes they're too anxious to get all the bells and whistles. It promotes wanting to get all the bells and whistles and all the seductive technical stuff without getting a basic sense of design.
Right.
And without a basic sense of design, weight and balance of form, it's just like the Guitar Institute of Technology people in the 80s, where everybody all of a sudden was a shredder. And these people, they were up and down the fretboard, and you're going, wow, that was amazing, and you're left with nothing. And so there are people that are very technical, and yet still, you're going, wow, they still have a strong sense of design. Somebody that is that I think is, again, not that this is just somebody that has interesting technique, but still has a nice sense of designs. I was just somebody like Pegas, LTS,
Sure.
is somebody it's interesting because he's got that loose spray painterly thing that LTS likes to do, and yet he's bringing in other things, kind of bevels and quasi-chrome bevels and things along with that. So it's still LTS, but it's still accessing other contemporary influences.
I don't think we even talked about that, how styles... Well, we kind of talked about it a little bit because I was talking about how when you trade flicks with people before social media and you'd get stuff from another part of the country,
right,
and you'd see a tag or a throwy style that you're like, that doesn't look anything like kind of throwies that we do. But now with so much access to information, it seems like everything's kind of starting to blend together, and it's harder to tell. So you have writers out here trying to emulate Philly-style tags, and it's kind of... I'm not going to really give an opinion on what I think about that, but I mean, I guess I am. It is kind of weird that like we don't have that anymore. I mean, we do have it because nobody out here is really doing Philly stuff. I'm using Philly as an example because they have a really distinct tag
I know
style.
somebody that's kind of doing. I mean, actually, Asher is somebody that's interesting because he's doing basically he's doing blocks. He's emphasizing blocks, but he has a really interesting tag style too that's coming out of neighborhood lettering. But he was never in a neighborhood, although as he's first person to say, he was state raised. And so he spent a lot of time in institutions with people that came out of neighborhoods and kicked them down their letter styles.
Sure.
And so he's taken neighborhood styles, but he's got a modern graffiti influence, and you see him up a lot around downtown, the east side, and it really stands out. But to me, on one hand, it's weird that it's kind of like with economics and commerce. There's this everything is everywhere. That's out on the streets, folks.
San
We don't have a chamber in the back where
I wanted to make a
we're
T-shirt.
keeping enemies.
There's this T-shirt idea that I had that said like San Pedro, always somebody outside yelling, because like that is so common that somebody's just screaming outside.
Those will fucking sell too. That's good.
So it's kind of like with the Thomas Friedman, the writer and economist, was talking about the world's gotten flatter. You know, that there's that everything is kind of this weird culture kind of just gets distributed, and the distinction of culture a lot of times gets lost because there's so much easy interchange, and that's there's a real problem, or it's dismaying in a way. On the other hand, it's up to the individual to come up with something individual. And it's kind of like, it's interesting because, for example, there are, in terms of graffiti writers making their way into the contemporary art scene, there's no shortage of those guys, but it's interesting when I see graffiti writers doing just pure abstraction, and it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand I want to say, now you know, because some graffiti writers are doing full abstraction, and I just want to say, okay, it's great to do that, but you do know that is 70 years old.
Right.
That doing pure abstraction is 70 years old now as an abstract expressionism. So it's nothing new, and so they shouldn't be surprised if somebody says, yeah, so what?
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are some people that take that and really do make it personal, and I think really make it personal. I think Zess, his pure abstraction is interesting. I think that Reyes does, you know, it's a very different style of pure abstraction, but still really interesting. And then you have geometric abstraction that Revoke is doing. There's some really strong work and really thoughtful work. It's some graffiti writers still think they should be getting props for just having skills and sticking it on a board, and that it should be in a gallery because of their skills. Well, there are skills, and I may love it, but unless you're flipping it in a way that art world can access people's sensibility as well. It doesn't mean selling out. That just means that there has to be something that people can see that is different than what they can just see on a wall.
Sure.
There are people there. It's something that I've actually been writing about lately. It's nothing I've published, but something I've been writing about. I don't know exactly what I'll do with it, but the idea that above ground artists kind of have a dismissive and condescending attitude towards graffiti in general. They consider it kind of a folk art at best. But what I would want to say to any graffiti writer that still has obvious evidence of graffiti as part of their work, as opposed to doing something completely apart from graffiti-looking work, is that you would want to say, well, it's glyphic modernism.
Oh, interesting.
Glyphs being the letter elements, but you're using it not as representation, so it's not commerce. It's not for the sake of advertising, it's for the sake of self-expression. You're using letter forms for the sake, you're flipping it in a way for personal expression in the same way that de Kooning or any of the abstract figurative people use the figure as a springboard for formal creativity and whatnot. That's what I would say to people. But it's interesting that there are people with a relatively educated eye in the above ground art world that they don't know how to look at graffiti. They don't see the rhythm, they don't see the weight and the balance and the connections, and that it's formalist from the standpoint of balance and how much density and activity and flow and rhythm and all those things that should be part of any compositional piece.
And the three that you mentioned in particular, along with those closest in their circle, are doing just that. I feel like, and they're reaching such a wider audience by instilling all those values in their new work.
Somebody else I would want to. Somebody's going to say, "Well, why didn't you mention?" Well, because I can't.
There's a long list,
But
exactly.
Prime is doing really beautiful work, and what's so interesting is that people that don't know, he doesn't try to hide his background. He's very open about his background and where it comes from. But anybody just looking at the work would just say, "Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful work." And then they read the wall, they go, "Oh, wow, he came out of graffiti culture and this kind of rough background." They go, "Wow," because the work is so elegant,
right?
And just there's a thoughtful aspect to what he does now. Then I really wish him the best of success.
And those who didn't know that's where he came from originally and were so intrigued by that work that they saw in the gallery or the museum, and then they find that out, it's more of a punch for those new fans.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's really elegant, strong. It's just strong visual work. And I know that when I co-curated this show at the Pasadena Museum of California Art in 2011, we had conceived of the show before we heard. We were working on the show for months when somebody says, "Hey, did you hear that Mocha is doing a show, Art of the Streets? It's going to be opening up like the same month, the same year." And at first we were bummed, and then we actually kind of went back and forth with them to kind of support each other's venture, because the one that I co-curated at Pasadena Museum of California Art was strictly about guys that were active, either came up or were very active in LA, and then developed, came out of the graffiti scene and developed a body of work that was different from what their street work that was for the gallery or museum. And we had stuff that was letter-based, stuff that was figurative, stuff that was purely abstract. We had sculptural. We had really interesting, and there are some people that were really pissed off at me because they weren't in the show. Well, I'm a veteran.
Right.
I'm a veteran. Why wasn't I in the show? Well, because it wasn't about LA history. It was about people that were here, came up here, or were really active here. Not everybody was born in LA, but that had developed a body of work that was for a gallery or museum, and not everybody had a strongest portfolio. They had skills, but not necessarily stuff that would have been appropriate in the gallery or museum.
Sure.
And some people understood that, and some people still, look sideways at me, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because again, you can't do anything with somebody hating you without somebody hating you.
Well, you can't. I mean, you can't. One, there's only so much room, and like if you really think about the show you're curating, if you have a very specific criteria and they don't fit your criteria, then it's not like you don't like their stuff.
And I had a co-curator, Shirley Lifshin Sheng Shirley. Her mother named her Shirley, and so she's, gets used to at a restaurant. Okay, Shirley, party. Yeah, okay, it's me. Okay. She was my co-curator, and it was good to work with her. But I also, there were times when I was saying, well, what about this? What about this person? She was like, it's weak.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
Shall I name names? Who is weak? No, I won't.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
No, but that kind of brings me back to like the support of crews. Like I know plenty of affiliates from other groups that I'm a part of, right? That have done some amazing shows and displays in very well-known museums or whatever. And myself and a few other members weren't on that list for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. It's like, so proud of these guys for doing what they're doing and getting to where they get. Like, I truly feel like that support system has been watered down in my experience. And some who have, let's say, okay, first of all, loving them and respecting what they're doing regardless is always the best way to go about things, in my opinion. But I also see some that have come up with the help from this person and that person, and kind of they got that rope to like kind of monetarily succeed, right? And they pull nobody with them in a sense that probably could come for the ride. And I feel like I've seen that often enough that it's disappointing. And is there something that could be done about that, or is that as old as time with any profession? I don't know.
There's always going to be association. Sure. there's a certain amount. People get success for various reasons. Sometimes it's actually even talent.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a combination of talent and luck and association and who you knew and being the right person at the right time, or having the right attitude. It's not just one factor.
Yeah.
And people that, you could have all the talent in the world, and it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get the appropriate props for it. There's a whole host of factors that come into getting out there. They're people that, again, you wrote a book, and I'm not stopping anybody else from writing a book.
Right.
Write a book.
Yeah.
And I urge every crew to get their own story and history down. I know some crews are doing more of that, but I think that it would be great if every crew, because there was somebody who was saying, well, there's so much more, I really appreciated your book, Steve. By the way, my book is still in print, Graffiti LA, Street Styles and Art. You can get it cheap on Amazon. Beautiful. It's not easy to rack, 3.5 pounds of hardcover. Sorry, not easy to rack, but I am honored to have been told it is the most stolen book from the Echo Park Library. Thank you, kids. But it is still in print. It's been I don't know. It's had a bunch of press runs, and it's still running. After this time, and it's in libraries around the world. I'm glad to say, representing LA, a lot of LA history. Yeah. And so I feel good about that. But there people that just, said, but there's so much more story. I said, yeah. They said 40,000 words. I gave them 52,000. Some of that, and that wasn't everything I wanted to say. So, of course, there's history left out. Sure. And so everybody should get their own history down, however that gets preserved. But I think that's a good idea.
Absolutely.
I think it's a great idea. And it's also like another point that something that I think about a lot when people complain about so-and-so doesn't get enough shine or things like that. It's kind of like, is there more you could do to, like, if you go and hit the streets and you don't get enough shine or you don't get whatever credit that you deserve, how much of that is of them thinking about, like, what do I need to do different to get that?
Yeah. It's kind what are you doing about it? Right.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It just seems like a kind of a defeatist thing to be like, oh, well, what about me?
Yeah. They're pointing the finger outside of anything but inside of me type of thing. It's never going to get anybody where they want to go. As far as my experience, what am I doing about it?
Yeah. And also why, if you're not doing it just for the doing of it as the primary thing, then probably you should do something else.
There you go.
Yeah, that's another great point.
Because there's too much hardship.
Sure.
If it's not just for the the act of doing it.
And that's just it. What's your intention? What's the real reason your heart and you're doing this? And that's kind of what I see with social media and youngsters being forced onto a stage. I see a lot of, like, Bus brought up a good point last time, a lot of people doing graffiti that they think people want to see and not the stuff that they want to do themselves. So we talked about taking away the likes, the followers, the comments, and you just scorching your own path and not worried about what other people might like or not like and how different that might be and where your focus would be and your intention, right?
Yeah.
And who would weed themselves out because they don't get that, you know.
Yeah. I try to be so the book came out in 2007, and I just tried to be honest, where it was like a puzzle that you could put together in 100 different ways, 1,000 different ways, but what was the arc where it wouldn't just be a jumble? And so there was the historical aspect, the technical aspect, and the social aspect. I realized at a certain point, and so that's what I tried to bring out. And I tried to have a balanced arc between the east side and the west side and the south side, and for the most part, I feel good about the response I got from people, feeling that it was not lopsided. Some people were saying, no, it should have been more this side or that side or more of us, or but by and large, people, I got a lot of love for the book that I wasn't expecting, actually.
Sure.
I was expecting a lot more bitching.
Yeah.
And I actually have run into people over the years that said, well, we should have been in the book, but still a good book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful display. Absolutely. Yeah.
I can't even imagine trying to tackle something like that just by what you're saying, like of all the stuff that you had to leave out.
Oh,
like there's like 500 times more stuff that you had to leave out than you could put in the book. Like the fucking book would be the size of this table.
Yeah, exactly. And there are limitations. There are limitations of what you could do. So it generally was people that had a strong representation, not just when the book came out, but, at different periods of time and over different periods of time. And then there were some outliers. There were people that were like, this is just weird. So this needs to, you need to see there were outliers even within the graffiti scene, that graffiti writers are going, I don't know what he's doing.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And it's like a miniature, museum or show. Same kind of procedure as far as who and who's not, and make it make sense in this little amount of space we have.
Something that I felt good about, by the way, speaking of who's, is it was very weird when I was doing the book. I assumed that if I knew something, that everybody knew it. And then there was a number of times where all of a sudden I'd be talking to somebody and they'd say, "Oh, well, that was so and so." I said, "No, that was so and so." It was, and I thought, "Oh, holy smoke!" That's because I'm talking to all these different crews, and there are a bunch of people in a bunch of crews that aren't necessarily talking to the other side of town, and so they didn't necessarily know that. But one of the things that I wanted to bring out was all the West Siders that had all this high respect for East Siders, and the East Siders that had respect for West Siders, so-called, and I don't know that before that people realized, how much respect, say, Revoke had for Tempt and for Sinner, or how much respect other guys had, in the other direction. So
sure.
I felt that was a contribution just in terms of dialogue that I felt good about.
I didn't even, I had heard things now and then when people, oh, he's a West Side writer or something. But like, I was completely unaware of that shit. Like when I was writing, like
just writing.
I respected everybody. I mean, it wasn't really on my radar. Like, you're from here, or you're from there. It wasn't until later that I sort of learned about that, and I was kind of like, oh, that's interesting,
I didn't realize I was supposed to hate those people.
Yeah. Nobody gave me the memo. Now, not that it would have changed anything, but it was like, we would meet up with people from all over the place and go paint with them. And
it's always best. The bigger the mix, I understand that there are advantages to keeping things like, the way some people put it is, some crews are mom and pop crews. Just if everybody knows everybody, and they don't want to ever be so big that everybody doesn't know everybody. And then there are other people that want to say, "Oh, well, our crew has all these members and international members and all that." Okay, it's all good, but there's something about a mom and pop crew that also is really nice. Where it just doesn't get too big. It's because it can be more of a family.
Yeah, I like that aspect of crews. I mean, I think they're all cool, and the big ones, the small ones, but there's always something really cool about those crews that they stay kind of small, and everybody knows each other, everybody's painted with each other. It's kind of a different vibe.
There are crews that I didn't know about when I was doing my book that I realized later, it's like I will admit, there's actually, I have if people want to see some of the early archive that wasn't necessarily in my book, graffitiLA.com, go to the gallery pages. I have 3 gallery pages, and it just, I just posted, it's been a long time since I've been actively posting more stuff, but there's hundreds of things that start in 1990 and move forward from there. But I didn't realize consciously when I was, until after I'd done the book, that there was a crew called PTI, Piece to Impress, also known as 3A, and that I'd shot their stuff, but I didn't know that, that's a crew, and I will admit it, this is, I was embarrassed to find out. I just thought the phrase, the hardcore, was a phrase. I didn't realize. So my apologies to the THCs, that the hardcore was a crew.
Sure.
I just thought it was an expression.
Yeah.
And even though I had gotten that, shot that big production at Belmont under the influence of the hardcore that can't be stopped. So, the UTI, hardcore, and CBS all doing that big wall, that great wall, and then later, some THC said, "Hey, knock, knock." And I was like, "Oh, sorry."
Yeah.
How would you know all? I mean, it's like you're seeing so much stuff. Like, how are you going to even remember all of that? Like,
it's not easy to.
Well, but I try. But I try to keep my eyes open, and and so but I'll have to say, anybody that says, "Well, of course, Grody's going to mistake stuff because he's he's not part of the scene. But I see people in the scene misattributing posts all the time.
Exactly. That's what, going back to what I said in the beginning, and your credibility and the knowledge you do have. The hardcore being one of my first families that welcomed me with open arms, and just like you said, having a tighter knit group that you know everybody and what everybody's drive and purpose and intention is. There's something so beautiful about that. And it was over time that I thought expanding meeting other writers, of course, over time, and wanting to paint more areas and join forces with. I've always had like a deep-seated want to join forces with other crews more than retaliate. And competition was always strong, but I think the joining forces was always a strong desire of mine.
Well, there's competition even within a crew anyway.
Absolutely.
I'm going to burn you. You're my best friend, and I'm going to burn your ass.
Yeah, just have a good day trying to burn each other, But then I think over time, the more organizations, groups, crews became a part of families. Not knowing everybody on a personal level watered it down in a sense that was... disappointing is not the word. I just wish we would have had more of a camaraderie and a closeness that you can find within those ma and pa crews, in a sense, right? So yeah, I understand what you mean by that, and love to all of them. It's just it's a trip. It's different.
It's interesting. Just something that popped into my mind that's apropos of nothing you've asked about. Is it's interesting that there's always been controversy, just within the above ground art world. What is or isn't art, or what is or isn't legitimate is a thing. It's always a point of controversy. But so is it in graffiti. In the graffiti world, there were people that I would see up, and some other graffiti writer said that's not graffiti, that's art.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. It's like somebody because he wasn't doing kind of classic letter style like Patna, W-A-I. I thought it was interesting. I thought, it's not like I don't understand what it is where people feel that something has to be within these really restrictive bounds rather than saying, oh, well, that's, that's interesting work.
Yeah.
There was a time when I saw something by Deuce, of GAW, and somebody was saying, "Oh, that's too artistic." And I thought, no, it's just good.
Yeah,
it's just good. So it doesn't have, it's not your format. So what?
Yeah, confined to whatever their perspective.
Is it graffiti supposed to be about freedom of expression?
Right.
And now you're saying that people, let's all express our freedom of expression the same exact way. Come on.
You were discussing with a veteran recently, and I think a quote that he used from a teacher of his at Otis was violating expectations, in a sense. I thought that was beautiful. Great way to put, the way art should be seen,
Yeah.
And that was cool.
There are people that, and then I'm always looking, it's like there are people that I really respect their craft and I really like it, but then sometimes it's like, there are a bunch of strong SPVs, but I've just noticed that Luder, Luder, just had a very individual style amongst those guys, and I thought, that's somebody I just kind of, it just pops, when I see that stuff, and different people have different styles. I like old school. I still like, I'll listen to the Ramones.
Yeah.
I still like a power chord.
Yeah.
It's so funny because I remember whenever it was that punk started to happen, I had heard about punk. I'd read about punk. There's this new thing, punk rock. It's so radical. And I thought, I'll have to hear that sometime. And then one night I'm driving somewhere and I hear this song and I just think, oh, that's just good. That's just good rock and roll. And then I hear, God save the Queen, we mean it, man. And the Sex Pistols. That's radical? That's just good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've always been kind of intrigued by that characteristic that people have. I don't know if characteristic is the right
predilection.
word. Yeah, that like if it doesn't fit into their notion of what X is, it's not this, and it's just a weird.
I understand that.
It's a limiting thing.
It's a limiting, but then that they can feel like they've got the inside track.
Yeah,
they know where it's at. I'm an expert. I'm one of the chosen. I'm one of the real people. I'm keeping it real. Okay. It's just like
Well, I think it kind of ties into what we were talking about as far as doing the work you want to do and not worried so much about, what label people are going to put on it. So if you want to do faces or something, maybe they're not traditionally, well, I guess that's characters, but like put a different example on there that's not traditionally graffiti. You're going to have people that are going to be like, oh, that's not graffiti. And it's like, well, like, says who? Do we have to do like a certain format?
Does it have skills? Does it have individuality? Does it have expression? Or do you keep pushing the envelope? Period. I know that Coffee is somebody that was, really emphasizing characters early on, and a veteran graffiti writer who shall not be named said, oh man, that's not graffiti. Graffiti is letters. And then, Coffee saw the reason that he saw that is because he saw the characters that this guy tried to do, and they were just so weak. they were just awful.
Right.
So of course he was going to say the letters were where it's at, because he couldn't do figures.
You have to wonder if a lot of that comes from. Yeah. Like, I can't do characters, so fuck characters.
Sure.
It's like that could be part of it. I mean,
I think that happens more often than we want to even acknowledge or admit, and that's a big part of. When I go back to like why things have kind of changed the way they are, I think to myself, when I started, and maybe a few people that I looked up to when I was younger, it was more about the pride of we're not letting them know where we're going, how we're doing it, how it's done, all that. And it's only now that I see maybe if we would have done that more often, everything else would be a little cleaner as well, because with those kind of tips and tricks come the etiquette and all those other things that were lost in the same shuffle of not letting you know how we do, how we rack, where we whatever.
A good example is like if you put out how to use a certain technique, it's not going to hurt anybody. Even if you put it out globally, like, hey, here's how you highlight your piece as like a basic thing. But like if you say, hey, here's how you get into this yard and put that on the internet.
Right.
That's going to hurt people.
Sure. Yeah.
There's another kind of knowledge that's not going to hurt people. So like you're saying, if you're super secretive about everything, if you're not putting out the knowledge, like here's kind of some of the respectful things that we do so that we don't all hate each other, that's only going to...
I do think it was, though, that it's really particularly meaningful when that knowledge is shared person to person.
Yes.
It's way more.
Yeah, it really means something. I mean, people talked about how open and how generous Hex was at the hip-hop shop. Okay. And that they'd say, I came in there and I was just a toy, but he treated me with respect, and they'll never forget that.
Right.
That he was kind to people coming up. He wasn't, he wasn't mean to people coming up.
He's still like that. Yeah. Like he's been in the shop here, and youngsters have come in, and it's like, he just starts dropping knowledge. Like, and what you said is a great point. Like, you can see something on the internet mixed with thousands of other things, but if somebody that you know and respect takes the time to physically, not physically, but person to person passes that information on, you're going to remember that. Like those lessons that I learned 20 some years ago, I remember like when I did something wrong and somebody said, hey, this is why you shouldn't have done that. I was like, oh, damn, because it had an effect. I was like, I really want to impress this person, and I just did the opposite. Right. So there's an emotional reaction, Right. Whereas when you see a list of don't do's and this and that on the internet,
of course,
there's no emotional connection at all.
There's no person there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
No, and even just looking, it's very easy to look superficially. I think that anything where there's any depth possible requires a mentor, whether it's learning to do fine cabinetry, draw the figure in a classical way, build a house, tune an engine, we play an instrument. We need a mentor. Somebody said, no, see, it's more like this. You go, okay. Then, I mean, that's the attention the quality of attention is so much more if you're dealing with somebody you respect. And they can say, now look at this piece. Do you see how that connection fits with that? And they went over this, but under that, and see how that balances that. And, oh, I see it now.
Right.
But, it's very easy, especially since there's a lot of graffiti that's very technical these days. It would be I could imagine it would be very possible for somebody to miss a lot of the value of the flow, how you develop that flow of really make that work.
Sure, trying to do it on their own, basically, without that mentor. Right. Absolutely.
Those are the exact, the stuff that you're saying. I'm thinking of examples of when I had those same conversations, like standing in Motor Yard and saying, oh, that's dope. And the guy next to me was like, well, it's not balanced, and you see how this and that. And I'm like, dude, I didn't even think about that. I just saw that person's name, and I was like, that's dope, because that is so-and-so. I don't want to name names of who it was, but he opened my eyes to something that I wasn't looking for.
Yeah. But
okay, so now we say that, what can we do to encourage more of this? I mean, I know you say that, you said something earlier and you said, oh, you're not part of the scene. I would argue that you definitely are part of the scene.
Well, thank you. You're very kind.
Obviously, well, I don't know. Maybe you have got a can and done some throwies and we just don't know what you write. So I'm going to assume that didn't happen. But there's something to be, you've been dedicated to the culture for 30 years doing this certain type of work. So you're part of the scene. Maybe you're not a writer.
It's funny. Well, I appreciate that. It's funny because, my degree in college is in painting, drawing, and photography. And I've always loved letters. I worked out the alphabet in grade school. I worked out the alphabet in bubble letters. And I mean overlapping bubble letters that looked like balloon animals. I worked out the alphabet. I have no idea where I first saw bubble letters, and I thought, oh, that's so cool. Letters that look like bubbles. I don't even know what I called them. I think I called them cloud letters or something. I don't know. But I know that I worked out the alphabet, and I've always loved letters. Now, my era, Dark Ages.
We didn't have pencils.
It was just after they invented electricity, I remember. We wore onions in our belts at the time. It was the fashion. It was psychedelic art. So I did psychedelic poster art, and I did letters. And I love doing letters, and I still actually have my poster collection of the San Francisco ballroom stuff.
Nice.
My Rick Griffins and my Moscosos and my Wes Wilsons and my Stanley Mouse and all that stuff.
Yes.
And I loved that stuff, and so I studied Mucha and Beardsley and all those people. So I've always loved letters, and then I studied, art. And so I will never have as fine an eye for a certain kind of detail of graffiti that a dedicated long-term veteran writer will have, because I think, oh, I see what's going on. Somebody goes, oh, yeah, but you see that colors, those colors. I mean, there was this big SH production at Belmont, and I appreciated it, but somebody said, oh, yeah, they're using all those new Montana colors. And so I was, oh wow. I wouldn't know. Some of these people, who the person was talking with, they knew if it was classic Krylons, they would have known Icy Grape and Jungle Green, whatever, and then they knew the new colors. That was knowledge I didn't have. And people will always understand something about connections and something that I don't have. But I do think I understand something about rhythm and balance and connections and looking for I really liked what Panic said, which was that for him, if somebody gets so flipped, so abstracted that you can't see the letter anymore, then there's a whole layer of interest that's lost, because it's just abstract art now. And you don't see what was done with the letter creatively. It's just lines. Even if it's skillful and it's not as interesting as if you say, oh, look what he did with that letter relative to this letter and how he blended it to that connection. It's the same thing with in jazz, that if you're an outside jazz player, he's playing with a balance. You hear the melody, but where he goes off the melody, but it's still referring to how it's altered or flipped. Once you get into free jazz, the melody's gone. It's just playing, and it just is much less interesting to me.
And I think like putting like a nice bow on like everything we just talked about, in a sense, like intimacy between the one-on-one conversation, like what we sparked in the first session, just between us. I'm sure it's been talked about many times before.
Sure.
I'm not saying that we started this, but planting that seed to reflect somewhere that reflects somewhere else, to let them know, pull your nephew, your neighbor, your son aside, sit them on the couch for 15 minutes, school them a little bit. And then someone that respects them, have them school them, and on and on and on. And I think like with more of that happening, that will, not that there's not a beauty to isolation and art in that dark corner by yourself and what you create, but that community and camaraderie, again, of that person you respect, like we're so fortunate to have when there was less writers, will ultimately influence the art and kind of bring it back to a...
I agree. You were saying, what can we do? Or what we, what's what...
Let's just say we.
Yeah, okay. If anybody is an up-and-coming writer, you want to find veterans that you respect and actually find somebody that will talk to you and mentor you. And, if you think you know it all, you don't need anybody, okay, fine. There's a real good chance, though, that unless you're really particularly talented, which, of course, everybody thinks they are, you're not going to get as far as you could. Yeah. Everybody needs a mentor to have a finer skill, whatever that skill is. Yeah. I don't know, any of the top writers that didn't have mentors, serious mentorship, who didn't take advice really seriously and respectfully.
Sure.
I mean, you can be just kind of you can put out a lot of noise, you can put up a crappy whatever all over the place, but that's a low-hanging fruit kind of goal. But that's, some people, that's their goal.
Well, it's, I think we didn't really, I mean, we've talked about this, but really how incredibly important that is to have a mentor. And I hadn't really thought about it. And I've been kind of on this school of thought, not so much graffiti, but like just general skills, in terms of, you can learn anything by watching YouTube videos. Like you want to learn how to fix a car, you can learn how to fix a car from YouTube videos and stuff. But like what you're saying, you're not going to get every bit of it, and even with a mentor, you're not going to get every bit of it, but there's little nuggets of stuff.
You still have to make the effort yourself.
Right. There's not
right. And
then thinking back, I feel like my memory isn't really the greatest for, a lot of different kinds of things, but like I remember those kind of lessons that we're talking about, where somebody I respected kind of passed on information to me directly. Like I remember that shit like it was yesterday, and it was like 20 something years ago. Like 25 years ago, somebody told me something. Yeah. And I remember it. Like I almost remember what the yard smelled like, and
right.
It's
because you were paying attention.
It's so critically important.
Like you said, like even a mentor is only going to meet you as far as the effort that you're putting in as well, and that's where you're going to really thrive and build, grow.
Yeah, and with the internet having all of this information, you think you get all the goods, but how much of those are you going to really retain? Yeah. The ones you're going to retain the most are the ones that that person directly passes to you. So, and
also, how much time do you just look at something? You glance at something, or do you really study it? And it's interesting because in traditional art, one of the things you do are studies. So you see something by Matisse, and you don't just look at it, but you try and recreate that. And as you're trying to recreate that, you go, there are all these things that you wouldn't have seen just looking at it. And so if there are people, but I think that there are people that are looking deeply, that are coming up, that are clearly, really looking at somebody. But it really is interesting that I think that design is still design. Design will always be design. weight and balance will always be weight and balance. And so there's some people, oh boy, all hate mail should be addressed to here at the machine shop, is that everything, that there's so much going on that you don't see that much. That if there was one area where there was less activity, you'd see the areas that do have activity would mean much more.
Yeah.
So a balance between active and not as active, is something that just is a design principle. It's kind of like there's some people. It's the term in traditional art that was from the Celtic tradition was horror vacui, means fear of empty space. It's like every little thing, there's 10,000 things going on, but when everything is equally busy, your eye doesn't really travel anywhere.
Right.
Yeah, that's crazy. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, and I think it complements what we were talking about with the information overload, which was our last episode, was kind of going on, like you're just flipping through shit and you see something, you're like, oh, that's really dope. And I do this all the time. Like I'll see something that while I'm looking at it, it has a huge impact on me at that moment.
Right.
But then that shit is gone like five swipes later.
Yeah.
And it's...
So that's why I would recommend that if somebody sees something they really like, actually do a study, sit there and sketch and try and recreate that, and somebody would learn more. They would see more about this connection or that, how did they, they would just see stuff that didn't. I mean, it's like it was interesting when I was talking with Pegas last month or whenever it was, a while back, while he was at a wall, first time I had met him, and he was talking about what he was trying to do, and I think that I can look at stuff, but it was so interesting to hear him say, see, I'm trying to go this over that, but then I needed to put some more black in here, but I needed to shade it this different way. And it was very, very nuanced what he was trying to do, what was over what was under what colors were next to what to try and get the effect that he had.
Sure.
It was also interesting that he was talking about how some of his, crewmates were talking to him when he was, younger about, just how, I don't remember just how he put it, but basically how he sucked.
Really?
And it really inspired him to say, oh man, I'm gonna pick up my game.
He sure did.
I'm gonna pick up my game. You watch.
Yep.
And he did.
Yeah, he did.
He did. He's doing really interesting stuff. It's also interesting that over time there are people that I've seen, but I don't know who it is, and then I finally, so it's like there's this big honkin' Pegas, this big LTS KOG, that's as you go through downtown, that's just the south of the 10 going east, that you see that's been running, and that was Pegas, and I think he said Versus.
That's pretty interesting. I had some experiences like that where I don't really want to get into detail, but like
no names,
where you were essentially shit on. And it was just like, well, fuck that. Yeah. I'm going all in now. Sure. And you needed that. Sometimes those little kicks in the ass are exactly what you need. Absolutely. In all things. To be encouraged is one thing, but to be coddled is not good. Oh, yeah. You need somebody to be able to say, so I teach, one of my other lives is that I teach self-defense.
Right.
And I just teach one-to-one. And I don't mind when I'm working with somebody of saying, no, that was awful. No, are you massaging my focus glove, or are you trying to hit it? No, hit it. No, and I don't mind telling them that they're doing crappy, because I know we're going to be able to get it right. Yeah, I know we're going to be able to get there. Now you're putting your waist into it. Now that would hurt.
Yeah,
good.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now it's a different way of teaching. I mean, I wonder, we're running a little long, so I don't want to get into a whole nother topic. Yeah. But I think actually, fuck that. I'm not even going to, we're going to cut that part out.
Yeah. He made us go
hello
ahead.
and goodbye.
Yeah. You go ahead.
He made a strong point, and I think that's the only way to teach anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I experienced that in my relationships and in anything else. So you don't want to be enabled and them to co-sign your bullshit. You want to be told exactly what's going on and what to improve or fucking the non-negotiables, and then you fucking work that.
Right. It's a balance between encouragement and critique. Not harsh, not trying to clown somebody, not trying to put somebody down, but just honest critique. Say, that's, and one of the things that I always point out to my non-graffiti related people is the honest dialogue that's part of graffiti culture. When you're at a wall, nobody's like tiptoeing, worried that they're going to hurt somebody's feelings. I said, dude, what's with that color, against that color? Are you joking? And that connection is really, no, bring that over the A and down below the, and it is really honest dialogue. And that's like anybody in any art form should envy that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess there's like a give and take. Sometimes people are throwing out advice that they shouldn't be. I saw.
Did I ask you for your opinion?
No, there was one guy. I'm not going to say anybody's name or even a hint so that anybody knows what I'm talking about. But somebody almost got beat up about exactly that, because there was this young guy and there was this older guy. The older guy's doing his thing, and the young guy's behind him going, "Oh man, you should do this and you should do that." And the guy was like, "I'm about to take you around the corner, man." So,
let me show you what I can do with this can.
Yeah, exactly. I'll show you some skills.
To kind of bring that back in, like, I do agree. I mean, it's there is definitely an honesty when you're painting with your boys, and somebody's like, doing a bunch of dumb shit, and they'll let you know.
That's cool.
Okay, you need to close this down.
It's open, but I'm concerned
whatever.
about people's attention spans.
Yeah,
I like where we were going with the mentorship thing, and maybe we could wrap it up on some final thoughts on that.
Everybody needs a mentor if they're going to be maximize their skills. Everybody needs a more experienced set of eyes to help be further, and it's good to have confidence in your game or what your skill set. But if you think that you know it all and you can figure it out all by yourself, you're probably a fool. You're either a genius or a fool, and you're probably not a genius.
There's very few geniuses.
Yeah, I was that fool for a long time until recently, and I'm a part of other support groups. And if it wasn't for those men who surround me, I don't know where I'd be.
Right.
And taking direction from another man or a mentor is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we can encourage more of that.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
Yeah.
So, Steve...
it's been a pleasure having you here at the table, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming out, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Is there any social media or websites or anything you want to plug?
I rarely post on my graffitiLA.com, but again, like I said, there's archive stuff that people can see, probably stuff they haven't seen elsewhere. I'm on Instagram, and I post a little bit of here and there, and that's the main stuff, and yeah.
Cool.
See people around the yard, say hey.
That's right.
I don't know if we're going to leave this in here, but I have a quick story.
Okay.
I don't even know if you remember this, but in 1993 I met you at the Witsit yard. And I know. This is one of those moments.
And what happened?
No, we got in a fight and you kicked my ass because you have all the... No.
I always wondered who that was.
I didn't know you were like some self-defense guy. No, but it was a memorable thing because I was painting and I was pretty new. I started in 91, but I really got into the real scene in 93. And so I was like just recently got an MSK and like I saw you and you were taking pictures and I was like, that's not a graph writer, And so I went up to you. I was like, hey man, how you doing? And you started just talking and I was like, damn, this guy really knows stuff. Like because you were talking about burning the spot. Like you said, oh, this is a really cool yard, but it's going to get fucked up because these guys are going and jumping over the fence and painting that place over there. And it was very impressive to me as a young writer.
Already on it.
Yeah, because I mean, you can tell who's a writer, but you had like the dialogue, even though you were documenting. I mean, it's like
not a writer.
You knew what was up,
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. It's funny because I wouldn't be surprised if I was also doing that partly just out of sincerity, but also partly to let you know that no, I wasn't Officer so-and-so.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's what I was thinking first. I was like, I wonder if this is a cop.
That's what everybody, as Casey used to say, when we first saw you coming around, we thought one of two possibilities: he's crazy or he's a cop. One or the other. They finally, realized, oh no, he actually just thinks this is interesting. He's documenting this shit.
Yeah.
So anyway,
but that was something that I remembered. It was a memorable experience for me.
Cool. I'm glad. I'm glad it was memorable and positive.
Yeah, very positive.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're going to cut this out.
Okay, good.
I mean, not cut this out.
Yeah, let's cut this out. Let's cut this out.
We'll leave it in there.
No, that was good.
But we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Find us at graffitimachine.com or your favorite platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just
call
it
good.
a day.
Thanks for having me in.
Thanks
Appreciate
for being
you
here.
guys.
Yes, sir.
All right, everybody.
Stay up.
Later.